I think that for Plato, it's the concrete life that we live, that for which we use forms and dialectic to understand. And that's what we really have to get straight.
So God can be appropriate, an appropriate name for the ontological creative act, so long as we understand God is not a actor, God is not a substance.
I think that we tell narratives about ourselves to give a kind of unity, but the narratives are always false.
Oh dear Diadema, tell me why do the things that are beautiful always have a darker side? Oh dear Diadema, tell me why is the good never good enough? Underneath the dirt and scar is an old and familiar face.
Hello, my name is Tyler Tritten. I'm acting as a guest host today for Danielle A. Layne for the podcast Platonic Mysticism. The reason she's not here is actually because we had a crisis with a pet. She's actually on her way, will probably join us here in about 25 minutes or so. But all the same, we're going to get started today with our esteemed guest, Dr. Robert C. Neville, or Cummings Neville, if you're not into the whole brevity thing. We're going to have a conversation today. We're going to see where it leads. Just as Socrates said, follow the argument where it leads. We'll probably just follow the conversation where it leads. But for a background for some people, Bob, as I know, can I call you Bob? Absolutely, great. So Bob has published, I don't know, more books than I have fingers. I think that's not hyperbole. So I'm not going to attempt to hold all the books, but I happen to have two right here. This one is the first edition with the original cover of your first book. Is that correct? That is correct. This is a later book, not the last, mind you, Metaphysics of Goodness. When was this one published, Bob? 3 or 4 years ago. Good. A little note on almost all of Bob's books, save the first edition of this one, but otherwise, on all of Bob's books, you can find them all on Amazon. Almost all of them were with SUNY Press. The artwork on the cover is also by his esteemed wife, Beth Neville. Is that correct, Bob? I don't know why I'm asking you, is that correct? I know it's correct. Good. Beautiful artwork. And your books range from philosophy to sermons to poetry. So vastly different modalities, lots of works. So to orient our listeners, Bob, the first question I have for you is, one, do you think that there is a through line, a golden thread throughout your work? And if the answer is yes, how might you express that for us?
Well, I think there are so many different ways of living that amount to pretty much the same thing, but take different forms. So, I think the kind of life that I can look back on now after 87 years is one that's very fulfilling. So my last book is a book about gardens, and that was written with my wife, who's coming in the door now. And yes, go ahead.
Good to see you, Tyler.
Uh,
Okay.
okay. And that's a book of poems, published sort of collectively. Starts with an early poem in which I respond to Shelley's Ozymandias with a counter argument, very formal, and reflects pretty much the culture that I had at that time. I was 14 years old. And now the latest poems, the first one and the last one, are written in 2024. And I think they back up my Platonic mysticism. But now there are so many different ways to live. And who am I to say that this is the only one?
So even in this late work, even in the poetry, you said that there's a kind of Platonic mysticism, obviously very apropos for this podcast, and yet it probably remains entirely debatable. What makes a thing count as Platonic? What makes a thing count as mystical? What makes a thing count as platonically mystical? How might you define these terms?
I think that all of us who are philosophers or semi-philosophers or whatever look two directions. On the one hand, we look forward, and here we're speculative and fairly hypothetical. And if we're really good, we're looking for the next philosophy, hoping that we get to plug into it. On the other hand, we look backward and draw from the traditions that we draw from, all sorts of things that are positive that we want to develop in our own way. I think a scholar is someone who wants to get those texts right. And a philosopher is someone who doesn't want to get them wrong, but wants to be able to learn from them and draw from them and work that way. So I'm a Platonist as opposed to being an Aristotelian. Aristotle said that everything is a substance. Plato said everything is a change. All concrete things are changes. And how do you know the changes? Well, you notice the forms through which they pass. And that gives him, I guess, his most famous distinction between appearances and reality. And reality for Plato is the forms, and the appearances are what really is concrete in life. And that's the world that we live in.
So, for at least the caricaturized version of Plato, not the
Sorry.
real, for at least the caricature of Plato,
Yeah.
right? It's often thought that Plato has the realm of the appearance changes, the forms are static, unchanging, eternal, stable. That's what's really real rather than appearance. Therefore, Plato is a philosopher of stability. But you just said the opposite,
That's
actually. Good.
I think that's it's really important to get that right. The world we live in is the world of appearances, and part of the appearances are forms, which we can then analyze as if we're working within our own imagination. So we can analyze the forms correctly or incorrectly, perhaps, and it's really good to have lots of different forms, different ways of interpreting the situation. But the world we live in is the world in which we're moving through those forms. So I take it that, well, you know, Raphael's painting of the School of Athens.
That's right.
Yeah, where Plato is pointing up to the heavens and Aristotle down to earth. I think he's got that mistaken. I think that for Plato, it's the concrete life that we live, that for which we use forms and dialectic to understand. And that's what we really have to get straight. And for Aristotle, in the 10th book of his Ethics, he says that the most important thing is to get your life in order so that you can contemplate. And when you contemplate thought thinking itself, you can get a little bit, but God is completely thought thinking itself. And that's about as mystical as you can get, but of an Aristotelian sort. And so he really wants to have life arranged so that you look at eternity, whereas Plato wants to have life arranged so that we can best get a grasp of things on Earth. Now, one of the things that is peculiar about Plato, you remember in the Republic, he has the divided line. And well, okay, but it's this way here. He says you divide that unequally, then you divide each of these sections in the same proportion that you had before. And at the top of the line over here is the form of the good, which is not on the line, but unites both sides. One side of the line is objects, other side of the line are faculties for understanding the object. And for Plato, goodness is one of the things that has to be thoroughly understood. And I think he wants to say in the Republic, I'm not quite sure that he does, but I think he wants to say that we don't get a vision of the form of the good. On the other hand, it lies behind all of our thinking and then can be excavated that way. So in some of his later works, when he gives up the form and appearances and opinion and dialectic categories, he comes much closer to saying what it is that makes something good. But those are all categories in the things, and they're not categories of what lies behind the things. So I'm a mystic in the sense of saying that we never can grasp the form of the good, but I've got a different language for that. But we employ it. And so we can then spend time thinking about that.
So this is very interesting. At least it's very interesting for me, right? On the one hand, you're saying, well, Raphael got it wrong. We should have had Aristotle pointing up to what eventually the idea of God is self-thinking thought and this eternal perpetual motion that doesn't change, and that we rather should have had Plato pointing down to appearances as they pass through the forms or pass from form to form to form to form. So a philosopher of change, a philosopher of becoming, and hence in this way save the appearances, if you will. And then you also added that Aristotle was a philosopher of substance. Does this imply, if I can ask a series of small questions that in my mind are related, and I'll see if you agree. Does this imply, one, that Plato's not a philosopher of substance?
Yes,
And
it
then
does.
you
I
say
think
that
it's true.
thing is true. Okay, good. And then you pointed to the conception of the good. Both Plato and Aristotle have conceptions of the good. Would it be fair to say that for Aristotle, the good is something like entelecheia, namely something comes to its full achievement or actualization, and then hence it's perfected, it's completed, and so it stops.
Right.
And in Plato, since the good is, as it were, off the charts, you said here's the divided line and it's off the charts on each end, we don't have that. So that it is perpetually, is that a fair recapitulation on my part?
I think so. Yes. Yeah, I like that. And
Okay.
that shows Either that I'm clearer than I had thought, or that you're smarter.
Oh, let's go with the former.
Oh,
Absolutely the former.
no.
Yeah, yeah. Um, now, in my mind, the linchpin of your thought is a notion that we find in this early book, God the Creator, that runs all the way through everything, at least through the, I'll put it in scare quotes, proper philosophical works, right? Is the notion of the ontological creative act, which, given what you've just told me, also strikes me as eminently Platonic, but I'll save that for a moment. I'll first ask you, could you tell us what is the ontological creative act for you?
Okay, that requires a little bit of background.
Okay.
Uh, Consider what it is to be a determinate thing, determinate, this rather than that. I believe that requires that to have a determinate world uh, where there are changes that are determinate uh, means that you need to have two kinds of conditions, components. You need to have components that relate one thing to another and components that separate the things, so that to be a thing is to be a harmony. Now, it's a really complicated harmony, and the more we talk about it, the more complicated it'll get. But how is it then that we unify the world that includes the essential features of different things together? The ways by which things relate to one another, that's their conditional components. But you wouldn't have anything like that. You wouldn't have that unless those separate things also have their own essential features. And the essential features need to be integrated with the conditional features. And so, what is it that is this context of ontological togetherness? And I say that the only thing that can be such a context is an act that creates them to be that way. Now, the act is not a thing, the act is a making. Most acts of, in the world have stages, so we can give the structure of the act. But the act that's ontological creates all the things that are possibly related to one another. And that includes being related within time. Therefore, time is very important for me because I want to say that the act is not in time. The act creates time. Time is a characteristic of determinate things, determinate harmonies, and we have to give an account of the flow of changes. So that is that's very important. Now, the ontological creative act is contingent, but not contingent on anything. So most things in the world are contingent upon their antecedents and a variety of other conditions. But the ontological creative act it's the coming into existence, the bringing into existence of determinate things in relation to one another. And therefore, it has no antecedents. This means that the contingency of the ontological creative act is a function of our intellectual understanding, however we understand that. And that's created. And so once we're examining the foundation of the creation of intellect, we can't apply the strictures that would say that an act needs to have an actor about the act itself. So the act, I claim, is not an actor except insofar as it's the creator of the ontological array of determinate harmonies. Can you make sense of that?
I'm going to try. I think yes, I'm going to try it. I
Okay.
have so many questions here, and I'll see if I can get through them, and I'll see if I can pose them in a sensible order. Time matters, as you just told me. Uh, let's start this way. You said so. The act is not a thing. It's not a substance. That harkens to what we've said before. This seems Platonic rather than Aristotelian. And you also said that the act does not need an actor. Yet, this book here, God the Creator, why? So, two questions. Why God the Creator rather than God creativity? And why is the name God appropriate?
Well, I wrote that book a long time ago, and now I relativize the word God, and I took it to be uh, the name for the ultimate. Now, in the book, I argue that God is an ultimate creative act. So that gets me into a little bit of trouble because people are going to say that God has to be a substance. Most people are born to be Aristotelians in the United States and in Western Europe. Now, that's not at all true of people in China. So if you say that what creates the world is God, then you have to understand God as an ultimate creative act. That's the argument of that first book.
So, God can be appropriate, an appropriate name for the ontological creative act, so long as we understand God is not a actor, God is not a substance,
Right,
God is not a thing, God
right.
is not a condition that precedes the act and the act but one of its properties, so forth and so on. Or, as you said, I mean, brilliantly, I thought, as you said, we have to learn to not be Aristotelians.
Yes, right. Yeah, and that's hard to do sometimes. Uh, our philosophical language is mainly an Aristotelian language, and you have very great philosophers, say like Descartes, who are stuck with the Aristotelian words, even though he means something much more Platonic, I think. So now, what what I think is that the ontological creative act has to be viewed by us in our dialectic as contingent, but not on anything. So we can't say that there's anything behind it. Most people would like to say, in fact, Christians have frequently argued that if we could understand the mind of God, we would understand more about what the world is. And I think that that's wrong because God has no mind. To say that God has a mind is to say that God is in his determinate creatures. So, which I don't want to say.
So this idea that God is contingent but not contingent on anything.
Right.
This
Yeah.
this notion of contingency, if I can add a little history and biography here, I
Yeah.
think is one of the first things that you and I really found is simpatico.
Right.
Because we're in I think profound agreement on this point that contingency runs all the way down. Contingency is not contingent on something, hence it's not like a contingent necessity, but it's contingently contingent, right? Not necessarily contingent, not contingently necessary, contingency all the way down. So I want to ask about how far you might think this, and I know you'll think it far, right? Does this mean then that, let's use the word God as a placeholder for this ultimate then, understanding all the qualifications and problems and thorniness with the word. Does this mean though that God or the ontological creative act has no a priori attributes?
Yes, it does.
Okay,
Its attributes are all created,
okay,
not a priori in that sense.
okay. And so in that sense, if the ontological creative act has no a priori attributes, and it has therefore only a posteriori attributes, like goodness, for
Right.
example, does this mean that the only proper theology could be a radically empirical theology?
That's a very complicated question. I would like to use the word empirical very broadly, so as to include what I take to be a proper description of what it means to be determinate. That's not a priori, it's empirical. In my sense, it's empirical upon something. Uh, uh, but I would take there to be four forms that are involved in any determinate thing. This is now over and above the conditional features and the essential features. In the first place, a harmony needs to have some form. And a thing within time gets that form from the future. Takes on one out of many forms related to it. And then it has to have a place. And that place is defined relative to a whole lot of other things. So it's a place only because of its conditional features setting itself in the world. And then everything has to be a unity of its features. That's not quite like a form, but it's more like that. And when you get the form of the thing and its components and its relations all together, you've achieved goodness of some sort. And so every harmony, according to the way I think about it, has some goodness to it. Now, harmonies conflict. The good of this is in conflict with the bad of that, and so forth. But in itself, harmony has a goodness in it. Now, you ask, how does this come out of the act of creation? Well, it's my interpretation of the most broad categories of the cosmos, and that's empirical. And I could be mistaken about that. It's very difficult to find anybody who thinks abstractly enough to think about determinateness per se, aside from you. And that's what we can talk about, if you like. But you see now how the ontological creative act lies behind all of the connections that we have. Why don't you bring your wife in if that's
Well, oddly enough, I thought that was her coming in. It turns out it was the dog, healthy enough to push the door open despite the
okay?
visit to the vet today. Uh,
Okay.
Oh, she's back there. She's on her way. Let me pose another question while she's coming in, because who knows how many more questions I'll get to ask when she enters. So you've outlined for us four forms of determination. All determinations are posterior to the ontological creative act, and in this sense, a posteriori. No determinations are prior to the ontological creative act, and in this sense, there are no a priori attributes or whatnot. And in this sense, and you also added it's fallible. I could be wrong. So in all these senses, it's empirical. Uh, but it's not empirical in the sense of, a Lockean, Humean sensibilism. It's not sensationism. So would you say that it's fair that modern British empiricism is only a reductive empiricism? Would that be fair?
Yeah.
And your empiricism is appropriate for metaphysics, even.
I think I am an empiricist this way. Um, think about this glass of iced tea. It's here. It's related to me and related to you. No, I get it by feeling its coldness, seeing its shape. I get a sense of its weight, and have a variety of things like that. But you don't or appreciate it in terms of its coldness or its weight, or you get a slight vision of how it looks. See, I'll hold it up again. So, uh, I have different aspects of appreciating that from what you do. And we both have aspects that are common to humanity. We haven't yet talked about a human being, but we can. And the aspects of which we are related to the glass are
He's gonna get on a different computer.
those aspects are peculiar to us. A fly would get it differently. If you think now we're talking about an Alpha Centauri star, which nobody here has seen directly, and when we do see it indirectly through microscopes, through telescopes, the light that we're seeing is millions of years old. We have developed through the invention of the telescope another aspect for getting at things that we had no aspects on before. Now, I want to claim that whatever is real is related to us in those aspects that constitute its real connections. So when we think of a thing, we indicate it, but that indication comes only from having the aspects that we know of. And we can also indicate it and say, well, it must have lots of other aspects that we don't get, aspects that the ant would get, or that the sun would get from Alpha Centauri. Now, the sun's aspects would not be organized in terms of thoughts, and we organize them in terms of thoughts. And that's just biologically the way that we're fitted up. So that it's here I'm really not a phenomenologist. I think, according to my way of thought, that our interpretations of things are in terms of mainly ideas and feelings. Sometimes I might be able to get a sense of the the gravitas of the cup. I have no sense of the gravitas of Alpha Centauri. So a human being that is made up of zillions of these processes of appreciating things that we organize more or less well into our world, and we think about them more or less well with consciousness, and we think with consciousness of other people's consciousness. So I have some sense of your consciousness, and you do of mine. But I take power naps from time to time, and when I do that, I don't integrate things very well. Dreams have a kind of structure of their own, but that's more like a biological structure than it is an integrated human structure.
Oh, you're going to join us this way. And there's one thing that you said that surprised me here, unless I've misheard, and then please correct, but you said there's 4 forms of determinacy: form, place, unity of features, and goodness. Did I get that right?
But the form, or components to be formed, the location, and the form of the thing coming from the future, which gives it.
So there's what surprised me is the only temporal word I heard was from the future. And I guess I'm surprised that time doesn't land on this. Why not?
If you think about a thing, a harmony, it has a present moment in which it's actualizing some one of the many forms that the future has. And once it's actualized, that's the past. On the other hand, there you've got 3 modes. You've got the future, which has as its essential components pure unity or form. And you've got the past, which has as its essential components fixity or steadiness or resoluteness. And then you've got the present, which is what we are presently conscious of. And that is the movement from the future to the past. Now, the past has a determinate structure, and that is determined by the present. So that's a conditional feature of the past. And that structure is the result of the present's choosing from the future to do this rather than that. And so the future is what supplies the unity of the past. The future's conditional features derive from the past in the sense that that's the thing that has to be unified. And it derives from the present sort of a readiness to be actualized. And the present is essentially change, and it derives from the past, the things that the change has to relate to, and from the future, the forms that the change has. So that's my quick mini course and what it is. Hi, Danny. How are you?
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, sorry I'm late. But as you all know, we had a kind of family emergency. So,
Pet emergency.
pet emergency. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's doing well, hopefully.
She opened the door here.
Yeah.
I hear her outside barking already.
Mhm.
So those are dog things. Yeah.
So, darling, can you tell me what we talked about?
All right. So yeah, can I tell her what we talked about? The thing I think we talked about that you're going to find the most fascinating, and you correct me where I tell this story incorrectly, Bob, right? But Bob says provocatively, but I think you'll agree brilliantly, that the painting by Raphael, where we have Plato pointing up, Aristotle pointing down, should have been completely opposite, with Aristotle pointing up to ultimately God is self-thinking thought, a cyclical eternal motion that's unchanging, and Plato pointing down to the appearances as they pass through different forms, such that ultimately Aristotle is a thinker of substance and permanence. Plato is a thinker of change, appearance, and time.
No, I mean, I would agree because we have to think about the fact that Plato's first real influence was a Heraclitian. You think about was a Heraclitian was so if you think about the Cratylus and the value of constant flow and constant change, even in the language that we use, that language mirrors this kind of living, dynamic, moving, flowing and Plato seems to be very well aware of this and very well aware of Socrates' own commitment to the value of becoming. I mean, this is the beauty of the Timaeus is to show this child, so to speak, of intellect and Cora, right? Where Cora is the principle of animation and movement that always shakes things up and turns things in different directions. But at the end of the day, will always embrace becoming and never not being. And so this is one of the things that I find interesting is this idea that a lot of people think of becoming as what is in privative relationship to being, so that becoming becomes not being. But that's to make a category mistake, right? Becoming is relational being, right? What is otherwise than being that is absolutely one and stable and fixed? Well, that's going to be something that is always becoming too, as Parmenides says in the Parmenides. That's always relating to something, so always moving and may have a different appearance, but still is what it is, and then showing that relation, as I think you might agree with. Yeah, what do you think?
Yes, yeah. I would agree with that. But one of the big differences from Aristotle is that for Aristotle, the goal toward which a thing moves is its own completion or perfection. Whereas for Plato, the thing is itself already a harmony of many different harmonies. And what the good consists in the balance of these harmonies or the enhancement of the harmonies by changing other things. So I think for, well, here's the thought. Plato was a dramatist. He wrote plays, except save for the laws. And Aristotle was the inventor of philosophical prose. And therefore Aristotle could say what is, as he thought it. Whereas Plato couldn't say what is. And he has his dramatic characters play very different roles. In the Timaeus, for instance, Socrates hardly speaks. He speaks a lot in the Republic, where he controls the organization, but not so much the Timaeus, which takes place right after the Republic, morning after. In the Parmenides, where Socrates, as a young man, is criticized for the philosophy of forms and has to give it up. And that's a big deal for Plato, to give up on the rhetoric of the philosophy of forms. But there's Socrates as a young man doing it. And Plato often puts in some kind of contradiction to make you realize that you should not take what I'm saying now with absolute seriousness. So, for instance, in the divided line, which we talked about before, uh, in the dialogue, uh, you divide the first line up, then you divide each segment in the same proportion as the first line is divided. And that's supposed to give you the biggest, the next biggest, least biggest, and the smallest, the segments. But a geometer would know right away that the two middle parts are going to be the same. So Plato has built in that kind of correction. And I think that that's part of his dramatic effect to never quite say what he knows cannot be said. But meanwhile, he talks around about it in lots and lots of different ways.
So one of the things I believe
Excuse me?
sorry, one of the things I believe you're gesturing to is what is typically referred to as the unwritten doctrines, right? That there is a kind of esoteric, as Aristotle would argue, as well as most of the Platonic tradition would argue, where there's not one cause to the whole of reality, the one, right? But there's two, the indefinite dyad as the secondary cause.
Sorry, I'm
And,
not getting what you're saying.
the indefinite dyad.
I'm sorry. Now, okay, now say it again, please.
It's coming back. Don't worry. So Plato, supposedly, according to Aristotle, had an unwritten doctrine, right? Because the highest things, as is said in the seventh letter, cannot really be expressed. Or if they were, they would be simplified or made stupid, and or demonized. And that doctrine is that there is not one cause for all creation and reality, but there are two. There's the one in the indefinite dyad, where the indefinite dyad um, brings things back into indeterminacy, as you might argue, right? It is that which always makes even every determination always in relationship to its other, the indeterminate, and so constitutes this kind of movement, this dynamism, this relation of all things from first to last, right? And so I don't know if you're familiar with the unwritten doctrines, but if you are, what would you think about that particular theory? And if not, what might you find interesting about that theory?
Well, it's too bad that Plato was the one who was interpreted mainly by Aristotle, because you get a reduction of Platonism to Aristotelianism pretty quickly that way. And I think you need to have someone who goes back into reading Plato as a dramatist and ask, what's the meaning of the drama? And you cannot get a straight answer there. So you can get lots of hypotheses that allow you to back up on what is ultimate. But you call that the form of the good? Oh, that's one way of doing it, and the divided line. I just call it the ontological absolute, the ontological act of creation, which is not a thing, it's an act.
If I
So,
can follow up. Oh, sorry. No. Don't let me cut you off. Do you have more? No, I just wanted to
no,
follow up. I mean, probably I'm going to more or less rephrase Dan's question, I think. Um, you've come out really strongly here, rightfully so, in favor of Plato as opposed to Aristotle, right? And um, yet one thing we find in Plato is the chora and the indefinite dyad, right? And so I'm just curious, like, since you are so strongly Platonist as opposed to Aristotle, as you've told us today, where in your work, how does the chora get translated in your work? Where does the indefinite dyad appear, and by what name in your thought?
It would be the movement of the harmonies together, and they are ontologically together as well as cosmologically together. And the Kora is not a foundation of something that the harmonies stick in. I think there's only the harmonies themselves that continue onward. Um, so uh, Timaeus was a guy from Helia, but one of those. He was a logician, and when you have a logician analyze Plato, uh, he's going to have a Kora in order to have a thing that the determined things are posited in. But I don't think you need to do that. So another way of saying that is that I'm really lousy at logic.
As a Platonist, I'm curious about which dialogue you believe has been historically most influential and which one has been personally most influential and why.
I suppose that I like the Republic. It's the biggest. Uh, it starts off with Socrates and his friends down by the Piraeus watching a parade of horsebackmen carrying torches. And that's sort of like being by the fire in the allegory of the cave. And then it goes to the poets. Then it goes to the philosophers. And then when he gets to talking about uh, true opinion, that's when he's dealing with his brother, Plato's brother, I mean, say. And then when he gets finished with the four forms of explanation of what the good is, he moves into dialectic where he tells stories about how this or that happens. And I think that that's important. He ends the Republic back with an image myth. And what he says there is that everybody has to pay really close attention to who you can learn how to live a good life, which is a good thing.
No, of course. I love the myth of Earth. It's one of the most beautiful myths of all time because it makes us responsible for our decisions, the lives that we choose, and that we are at the same time freely able to choose depending upon our education or lack thereof. So here, I want to go back to your work, if you wouldn't mind. Um, so you have many books, right? And one of the things that I know as a spiritual thinker is this question of the afterlife or of death. What is that for Professor Neville?
The afterlife.
Yeah.
Uh, I guess I don't believe in any of it. I take the afterlife to be a continuation of the temporal life that we have now beyond its temporal limits. Uh, and I don't think we don't have to do that. We live the life that we've got. And when you get to be in my age, there's a lot less of that, except that there's a lot more that's pulled into how we live. So actually, nobody's asked me about the afterlife in a long while,
Sorry, I always ask the tricky question.
right? Yeah. Uh,
Has this always been your position?
always, Always
Have
what?
you, has this always been your position on the afterlife, or has your position changed as you've aged here?
Well, it has been since God the Creator. There is one poem in my book Gardens, uh, which what I wrote when I was 14, in which I do assume an afterlife, but otherwise, no. Uh, so I think that the significance of our lives now are what we enjoy subjectively. And then we also have some objective character for other people, and we're teachers. And so we present words to our students, and they constitute our objective identity, but they're in charge of what they do with that objective identity.
So might Professor Neville be objectively immortal?
Um, just a little bit longer lasting.
A little bit
I
longer.
doubt that I'll last anywhere near Plato's time. Probably not much longer than the pragmatists have lasted.
Well, can I digress for a moment to something you said before Dr. Layne, Danny got here? We're talking now, about this objective immortality, and you said, well, you might last a little bit longer than some, probably not as long as Plato. You also made this comment earlier that we find it really, really hard, almost impossible, not to be Aristotelians in the West. So, Plato might have a very long lasting objective existence in the West. And you said, somewhat offhandedly, but you said, but in China, they don't have that problem. Now, this is interesting for me for a few reasons. One, you're very good at comparative philosophies and comparative religions, which I think is important. And two, your comments seem to suggest that it wasn't just because that in the West we're Aristotelians, we think in terms of static and fixed substances because of the heritage of Aristotle, not because that's just natural and easy. And so apparently in China they find something else natural and easy. Is it a kind of Platonism there, or what allows that ease of disbanding with substance there?
Well, yeah, yes, it's easier to be a Platonist in China than it is in the West. If you had asked me to talk about Confucian mysticism, I would have been able to do that, talking about different texts. But the flow of things is much easier there. Now, we have a really complicated history of philosophy in the West, but we also have an equally complicated history of philosophy in China. There are the Taoists and the Confucians, both of whom would be Ruists, and then there's the influence of Buddhism, which starts off as, I guess, the earliest signs of Chinese Buddhism are pictures of the Buddha on pots that have been discovered without the texts. And then the Buddhists and the Taoists and the Neo-Confucians wrote and worked together, although they always tried to put things from their own standpoint. And now we have the influence of the West. Matteo Ricci tried very hard to introduce his Aristotelian Thomistic understanding of God. And so, but I would say that there's a more general assumption that what you see in China is the falling of the leaves. There's the opening of the leaves, then there's the falling of the leaves. And
Now, I don't know how long each of you want to go. We're at an hour, but I have one other question I would like to pose if you're each amenable.
Sure. Yeah.
So I can't help myself. I said earlier, I told a little history of you and I really found a philosophical simpatico over this notion of contingency. But
Say that.
I now want that you and I, in our history, found a certain philosophical simpatico over the idea of contingency. But now I want to point to where you and I might have a beef, a disagreement, maybe.
Yeah.
And this is the idea of personhood and whether or not it would or would not be legitimate to say that the ontological creative act has any personhood. You would deny it very strongly for reasons you've laid out. But I nevertheless assume you would be happy to ascribe personhood to me, to Danny, to yourself. And I
The
assume you
dog.
would do that, please. Yeah.
And
You
the
would do
dog.
that, you would do that because there's a certain togetherness, a certain coherency over time. Would that be fair? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
You also said that the ontological creative act has a certain context of togetherness at a cosmological level, not merely at local levels. Why can we not speak of a certain coherence that would attain to personhood at a cosmological level?
Okay. That's a very serious question. I suppose my answer is that I just don't see it. I look around me and I see all sorts of things that hang together, not as a person would make them hang together, but just because that's the way things go. And I also look upon our own personhood as something that's pretty much a human achievement. We're better than a dog's personhood, and I'm better when I'm awake than when I'm asleep. Although part of the human personhood has to do with folding up and then coming out again in terms of focus of attention. Uh, so, do you have in mind uh, a notion of the person that's more solid than that?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so it seems to me that what you're saying that I would agree with is that nothing a priori excludes a cosmological person. It's an empirical question. And then you say, well, but empirically, I don't see it. And then maybe the counter question to me is, well, where is it that I'm seeing it, right? And I guess if there's an answer to that, if there's a good answer to that question, I suppose it would have to be something like, to put it in a crude way, world history, right? Just as the coherence of world history, just as you are a certain history, I'm a certain history, Dandy's a certain history. The question is there a certain level of coherence in world history, history of mythology, if we can put it that way, right? And if the answer is yes, then maybe we can speak of cosmological personhood. And if the answer is no, as you seem to go, maybe we can't. But I completely agree with your premise that it's an utterly empirical question at the end of the day. I think this is right. Nothing conceptually necessitates or excludes it.
And this is why I would argue for a kind of personhood or individuation or idiotes, right? That at the highest level. Why? Well, because let's think about our relationships, right? Tyler and how I relate to him is conditioned on the history that I project onto him, right? That Tyler only becomes a loving husband because I see a loving husband, and vice versa, right? And that this is real, right? This isn't just me constructing No, he is a loving husband. And so therein, I'm able to reflect that back, and then he can know it and see it. And so that all knowledge is this kind of relational back and forth conversation or narrative. And so that when I, as a historian, start doing the work of unearthing texts that are lost or philosophers that are not normally respected or read, so on and so forth. And when I start to tell a story as Aristotle, this is one thing that I think Aristotle got right, was the importance of giving history a beginning, middle, and end, giving it a narrative so that it would actually have an identity as this particular event or this particular person or this particular au revoir. When we reflect on that as we are right now, that we participate in godliness, we participate in the identity of the divine. So I don't know what you think.
I think that we tell narratives about ourselves to give a kind of unity, but the narratives are always false. There might be a little bit of truth, but I think you have an amazing husband. But is he loving in all respects? Or maybe if he has feelings that are not quite right in some respects, now he pulls them back together again. But if a narrative is a story told out in time. Our narratives take place coincidentally at the same time, and the historians of what is it, the modern historians who like to talk about populations and things like that. There's a truth to that. Now, Ray Hart, who was my colleague here for a long while, recently passed away. He develops an idea of God that has an awful lot of narrative to it, because God is always involving itself in self-reflexive ways. But I don't see that the empirical world that we live in has much narrative to it. And the narrative that it does have is nearly always false, because there's so much more to us than that. Does that make sense?
Was the air conditioning on? I would have asked him to turn it off.
I asked him earlier if he could hear.
That, we didn't hear the last part. It blipped out.
The world that we live in has lots of narratives in it, but they're nearly always partly false. And there's so many things in the world that don't have narratives. The stars, the expanding gases, beginning of the universe. Is there a narrative story to be told there? Not much integration. So I think that, you as an historian have a lot to do to justify telling narratives of Plato and Aristotle. But in fact, you should check out with their servants to see how they really behave. And that's something that a historian also has to do.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, I'm really appreciative. Thank you. It's an honor.
Secondly, our apologies. It's usually has the appearance of being more organized, even though chaos is still lurking in the background. But today, the Cora punctured that appearance and merged forward and became more evident. And so, please accept our apologies for that with the issues of dogs and technology and coming in and out. But that makes it a lot like real life, which is to say there's a certain level of coherence, but it gets punctured and wounded and disjointed here and there. And so we were maybe a mirror to actual life here. But thank you so much. And
Yeah,
Thank you
I
for
would,
having this.
we would love to have you on again sometime soon. So thank you very much.
Oh dear